Okay, now, my name is Marcy Goodwin, and we're going to talk about museums. Because of contemporary art and contemporary ideas, museums don't just look backwards. They're about looking forward, not just today, but forward. And so they look at the artists of today, the artists of tomorrow, educators of today, historians of today. People who are writing today's histories write different histories than were written 100 years ago. And it's the same thing about art. Art changes. Is art getting bigger because museums are getting bigger? My answer is no. The art gets bigger on its own, and the museums sometimes have to enlarge to hold it. But I would say that the giant increase in, we call that scale, the scale of the artworks. The artworks increased in scale, not now, not in the last 10 years, not in the last 20 years, but beginning in the 60s, when art installations and paintings and sculpture became part of the environment. Then things started to get large. So by the 70s, they'd become very large. By the 80s, they were monstrous and gigantic. Now, why is this? It's not because of the overriding preeminence of museums that artists make these things to fit in museums. No, it's due to the economy, collectors, society, the globalization of the economy, the upswing predominance of major collectors who were suddenly made massively wealthy, who could spend money on impulse purchases. It's about conspicuous consumption. It's about rich people. It's about the wealthy. And so all of that has changed in the last 40 years. It isn't the museums. The museums are kind of the tail on the dog. They follow all this other stuff. And so museums have become larger for several reasons. In art museums, they have become larger not because the art is larger. That's a, what do we call that? Red herring. They have become larger because society's opportunities for community have been reduced. About 15 years ago, there was this wonderful book called Bowling Alone, where sociologists looked at what had happened in the American experience of community, because maybe 100 years ago, many, many people experienced community through their church and their religion. Many of them experienced community through their workplace. Many of them experienced community through their city's functions and their city's activities. All of those things have gone away. And so museums are sometimes now called the new cathedrals. And this is because museums act as forums for the community. They are one of the few willing agencies to do so. Interaction is important. And why? Because the community demands it. They don't want to just go and look at an object. They want to do something to it or about it or take a selfie. So there was this huge controversy about 10 years ago. Should people be allowed to take selfies in museums? Now, it's ubiquitous. You see pictures of the Louvre, you see pictures of the Rijksmuseum, pictures of any great museum in Europe or America. Everybody is busy taking pictures of themselves with the art objects or taking pictures of the objects. It's, we could do some very comical things about this, but this is what our society is. And museums are very aware of what our society is doing today, because that's their business. There's been a giant transformation in terms of major donors to museums over the last 30, 40 years. And the last vestiges of the original style are still here and there in little isolated pockets of the Midwest. In big cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, in New York, it's now the, what shall we call it? The hedge fund donor, the venture capital donor, the amazing windfall donor is how I refer to them. Often they're very young. Often they wish to make a splash. They can buy a Maserati, a Lamborghini, a Ferrari Barchetta. They can spend like $5 million to $10 million on a great classic car, or they can give money to a museum. And so it is about a form of self-congratulation. It's about a form of buying things money cannot buy. They want luxury watches. They want luxury cars. They want luxury homes in the country. They want to go to galas. They want to be seen in the society pages. It used to be society was rather hereditary. Now, society is very fluid and mobile. And so, in this, conspicuous consumption is a form of social elevation. And in the art world, conspicuous consumption is a little escort towards social elevation. So, when someone like Michael Goodwin has parties for Hollywood elite, he is trying to do several things. Number one, he's trying to show that LACMA is cool. LACMA's not out of it. LACMA is contemporary. LACMA is alive and now and moving forward. What in a museum will crystallize the community's attention? And what in a museum brings, let's call it charm, to the museum experience? You know, I went to graduate school where Chris Burden was an undergraduate, and I knew Chris Burden quite well. And I think that his piece in front of LACMA is one of the great pieces in the world to do that. The Michael Heiser is kind of like a deficit. It didn't come out as it was advertised. The Chris Burden came out more than. If you go on Wilshire and see people day and night, they're out there, especially nighttime. I've seen old people, young people, families, little kids, all playing in it, running through it, kissing, hugging, having their, engagement there. Every possible community pride behavior takes place in Chris Burden's sculpture. And so that is a beauty. That is a great thing. And it's also, I think at the Getty, they tried to get that with the Bob Irwin Garden. It hasn't succeeded as much as the Chris Burden for a variety of reasons, because it's a different thing. But if you look at, for instance, at the Walker Art Center, the Minnesota Sculpture Garden, which is down in the bottom part, that really succeeds. That's something everybody wants to come back to over and over again. And actually, the irony is that the attendance at the Minnesota Sculpture Garden is slightly higher than at the Walker itself. And so that's why we've been working on redoing the entry, the original Ed Barnes entry that faced the Minnesota Sculpture Garden, because the Herzog and Demeron, when they expanded the Walker, they placed a new entry facing Hennepin, but that's like a freeway. No one stops there. The real entry facing the Minnesota Sculpture Garden is the beauty. And so that the new entry, the revised, refreshed entry and expanded, will honor the beauty of the Minnesota Sculpture Garden. So each museum needs a thing like this, a minimum of one. And if it can have more, it's even better. So that the museum is proclaiming, we're a part of the community, we give to the community, this is how we give. It's interesting that in Milwaukee, another project I worked on, it's kind of turned around in an unusual way. The building expansion was designed by Santiago Calatrava. Now, the community refers to it not as the Milwaukee Art Museum, but as just the Calatrava. But the Calatrava goes up and down. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's slow. It has these wings like a bird that go like this. Of course, it cost $22 million to make the bird fly, which was a lot of money the museum didn't have, but it is able to do that. It's become this wonder of nature, man-made nature, for Milwaukee on an everyday, ongoing basis. It is the primary attraction in the city. But also, as part of it, they had a Dan, I think his name was Dan Kiley, did one of his greatest landscape pieces anywhere as part of the museum's expansion. And so there are exterior areas, and there is the walk into the museum, the Milwaukee Art Museum, and then there is this new amazing hall, and all of these various features that let them host the community in a much more significant way. And they just recently did a complete revamping of their original building, which was done by Kaler Slater, and it's turned out very beautiful, and it utilizes the views and the plazas and the movement through the Calatrava expansion in a very harmonious way. So museums try to achieve these things because they wish to be destinations. They wish to be the tent pole for their community. If you come to a major city, the museum is about civic pride. The museum is about saying, we live here and we're proud of it. We think we're contenders. And that kind of civic identity is something you can't just get like from a sports stadium. You know, over the years, I have been very, very fortunate to work on over 120 museums. 120. My own specialty, it was partly came because I studied art, is art museums. Now, the personal museum, and there's a lot of controversy about this, is that many of these profoundly wealthy individuals who have been able to develop collections that are significant are refusing to give their collection to a larger regional institution or statewide institution, and they wish to have the kind of acclaim and control that only a private museum can offer. I've worked on several private museums, including for the Broad and including for Mitchell Rails and Glenstone in Potomac, Maryland, and so on. Private museums really come out of the personal biography and personality of the individual who created this collection. They are about that. They are not about serving the community except as an ex post facto substance. Private museums are there about allowing the community to appreciate and respect the achievements of this individual. Some people might say self-congratulation. Others might say, oh, preeminence. There are different takes on it. I'm just saying that it is somewhat controversial among museum professionals today because there are a great many private museums being created right now. At the same time, many civic museums are struggling for funding or gifts and so on to keep going. So this is a part of America as it exists today. It is a thing in which it's about our society and what it values and how it operates. Whether one should go alone to show one is prominent, or whether one should work on a team with others. Each of these significantly wealthy individuals makes a choice. Right now, commercial galleries are in a crisis. There is a huge stratification among commercial galleries, and it's not unlike museums. You have small, medium, large, and massive, humongous international. So among the massive, humongous international, you have, for instance, Gagosian, that is the premium version of that. And I think I read last month they has something like a total of 70 venues around the world. And again, someone like Gagosian looks for the premium market. Wherever he is going to position one of his venues, he's going to go for the premium market of collectors who are willing to spend the kind of funds to get something of international, let's call it competitive value. But also, in my mind, many of these things are produced by franchises. So if you get a Damien Hirst, it's a franchise. If you get a Julian Schnabel, it's a franchise. Jeff Koons is totally a franchise. He's like Victoria's Secret. You know, it's all over. And so you see, for instance, developers in Florida advertising their new development by showing this odd brushed stainless or brushed aluminum sculpture that is a Jeff Koons of this slightly slender, sylph-like female done with his signature anodized aluminum colors on it, you know, red, blue, green, yellow. So because of the hierarchy of the market and the intense power of that top of the market level, you're seeing a strange, let's call it banding of the commercial art world. Each one has its own market. Each one has its own set of audiences. But what's happening is that the larger ones, the international ones that hit that international group of artists, the Solid Senders, the Gerhard Richters, the, you know, all the ones that I mentioned, plus, you know, there's a whole retinue of others. The ones that are able to hit that international market, they are in a flashpoint of continued success, or let's say reanalysis. Ace Gallery overextended, and so it's going through a period of involuntary reanalysis, self-analysis. It is a thing in which infinite expansion is not always possible, and the market may contract. At the same time, a very interesting thing happened in the 70s with Tamarind and Gemini. At that time, the United States suddenly became more affluent, and there were many more people willing to buy art. Many more people had disposable income, because within contemporary art and all that, disposable income, contemporary art are like that. So Gemini created a new market of multiples that hadn't existed before. When you bought an artwork, you bought the solitary one, unless of course you're buying a Remington, which of course might have been a posthumous Remington, or a Dubuffet that might have been a posthumous Dubuffet, or a Picasso that was a posthumous one. In this case, you are buying multiples from a living artist. And so the idea of multiples because what was radical about what Gemini did, Gemini, G-E-L, printmaking, but printmaking was not really what they did. They did some prints. The idea was they allowed artists to make multiples of their own vision of what they wanted to show. So when they made the airflow, Chrysler Airflow for Oldenburg, technically it was a print, but it wasn't a print. It was a vacuum-formed car. And so the idea of multiples allowed a lot of people to enter the art market that had been excluded when they could only afford singular works of art. Then what happened is that the idea of multiples extended itself over the next 40 years. And now we are seeing things in the art market that is a radical change. For a long time, the art market was dominated by just a few countries. Super wealthy industrialists in America and wealthy heirs to giant fortunes, or people who had created some fantastic, got the hiccups, fantastic thing that would be like a new cable TV system that has spawned many new art collections, or something like Costco, or a new form of shopping. Walmart, spawned a lot of museums. Then what's happened is that now the internationalization of the art market is almost complete. The United States is not the premier venue for this any longer. For the last 40 years, the United States was really, in a sense, one of the preeminent venues for this kind of thing. The collectors came from here. There was a lot from England, a lot from Germany, very few from Spain, almost none from Portugal, almost some from Italy, but they were the giant industrial fortunes. And in the past, there were none from Russia. And in the past, there were almost none from China. Now, it's flipped. So wherever you look at the economy's success, so the Chinese economy, overheated, hot, exciting to many people, and also producing massive amounts of personal wealth. So it goes somewhere. And so the idea of collecting in China has become a major, major feature of China. They have built, in the last 10 years, hundreds of new museums to hold all this art. So, and not only in the beginning, they would have collectors that bought art that was Western art, and in some cases they would buy historic Chinese art, but now Chinese artists are making art. So it's art's connection to the economy. It's like that, it's one. Those Medicis didn't collect that art for nothing. And it is all a unified thing. We're seeing the United States lose its total preeminence. What's interesting is that you have many of the new fortunes around the world showing up with their own collecting. We have the Prada Museum in Italy. We have the Garage in Moscow. We have a lot of other museums in Sweden and France. We have the Vuitton, the various other French museums all over. There's been a lot of those. And so we're looking at the internationalization of the art market. There's also a thing called art fairs. Art fairs are a major part of the current art economy. And so many of these dealers can't exist without the art fairs. So the poor people, I have friends that are on this torture track, they have to go all the time to Dusseldorf and Cologne. They have to go to London. They have to go to all the various fairs with all their various names, and they have to show their wares. And it's because the collectors used to travel, but that was kind of random. Now the collectors specifically go to certain shows and fairs to see certain things and also to see their friends and hang out. Sometimes I work on these projects and the collectors call them couple houses. And what it is it's a house minimum 12,000 square feet, but normally it's 20 to 30,000 square feet. And it's a house which includes a living unit for 2 people. They may or may not have children, but the children are usually not present. And that might take up 3,000 square feet. And all the rest is art spaces. And then the collectors go from city to city in these special personal buses, on these special personal jets, and they visit the different private collections in these couple houses. Some people, and I worked for a very lovely man in outside Pittsburgh. He was very dear. And he not only built a house like this, he renovated and expanded a house, but they build what they call art barns. Several collectors in LA have built art barns. And then they might be 5 to 10,000 square feet of basically what is hardcore exhibition space where you can put the stuff in there. Because if you do buy things on a regular basis, you have to have a place to put it. Now, all of these kind of collectors support the high end of the market. What is suffering now, because the middle class is suffering right now economically in America, is the middle end market galleries. Many are going out of business. Many longtime galleries are going out of business. Rosman Felsen just closed. Mark Moore is closing. Many, and these are galleries that have been in business for 20, 30, 40 years. What's happened is that because the shift of the financial capacities of the audience has shifted and diminished the center and enriched the top. So all those galleries that are supporting the top, and you could even look at Pace. Pace just opened a place in Menlo Park in Silicon Valley because, and they said the reason they had done it was that there is a new class of hyper-wealthy individuals. The venture capitalists, the people who, the Facebookers, the Googlers, all of this, who have profound personal wealth. And so they opened up this major gallery, I think it's a 10,000 square foot gallery, in Menlo Park that has a special feature or focus on art and technology. Since the early 70s, the market has changed profoundly. And it is more the internationalization, as I mentioned earlier, in which once you're accredited, once you as an artist are accredited by that international art market, then you have a fluidity. Your market, your price is stabilized. When you're at a middle gallery, they sometimes show emerging artists, but often they show people who are regionally known and a few people who are internationally known. There's a difference in terms of the status points, or whatever you want to call it, but there's also a difference in terms of the price and the price stability. I personally think that the art market at the top end is in a bit of a bubble. There's been a lot of writing about this, calling it tulip mania and all of that, like the tulip craze in the 18th century in Holland, in which people paid millions of dollars for a simple tulip bulb. But it is risking that. Should anything erode it, it could fall. In other words, could the billionaires' own financial capacities lose their structure or be brought into question? That top piece of the art market would falter. The middle level is going through a crisis in which many long-term dealers are having to say, why am I doing this? And either they find new ways to do it, or, via getting on the fair circuit and going around the world and dragging the stuff from country to country, or going to specific collectors in different parts of the world. It's probably going to have to rethink how it works, because right now the financial support for it has been eroding. And so then there is the bottom end of the market, which is the locals. Those are all the recent MFAs. Those are all the people working 2 jobs. Those are the people. There was a very interesting article I just saw online yesterday about, maybe it was in the New York Times or New York Magazine, about people who happened to, in New York, who happened to be building superintendents, and all of the ones that are artists or musicians that use that to keep paying for their family and their rent, but they're still doing their art, whether it's music or painting and sculpture. And so on that part, that group originally had thought they were going to teach. But now we're seeing that throughout the US, there's an oversupply of MFAs. The next question is, what do they do next? And also one of the questions is on the MFA thing is, what are they being taught to do? Some of them are taught to do social action. Some of them are taught to do identity politics. Some of them are taught to do marketing. Some of them are taught to do video or installations. As the art has changed, museums have had to change their own forms of installation, because for a contemporary museum, the idea is if the artist wanted the floor and the wall to be the contact and wanted their piece to sit in that junction between the floor and the wall, the museum had better install it that way. The museum has a responsibility to show it as the artist intended it. And one of the kind of hilarious things about this was that many years ago, a guy named Tom Beebe of Hammond Beebe Babka got the job to renovate the Art Institute of Chicago. And they built these baseboards that were like that big, maybe more. Maybe they were like 15 inches high. And you couldn't put anything contemporary in there. And it had wainscoting, all of this, picture rails. One of the questions is that as the low end of the market of the youthful artists and the artists who are artist hyphenates are making things, they are inventing new ways to install them or have them seen, and they are trying to respond to contemporary context. And so museums are trying to respond to this. Galleries certainly try to respond to this, because of course they always want the next new fabulous thing, and this offers that. But the question is whether the market responds to this. And so there's been much less stability in the lowest end of the market, much less capacity in the lowest end of the market. Many people are struggling. Many people cannot pay for another artwork. And so there's this big question. When museums look at this, they nowadays try to have museums that have a contemporary aspect, art museums with a contemporary aspect, which is included in encyclopedic museums. and contemporary, of course, they try to put in a thing of young talent or new work that is not within the normal metes and bounds of contemporary work being shown that's great. It's not this Sigmar polka stuff. It is something new, and it might be offbeat, it might be local. So in all these ways, the art market is changing all the time. And why is the art market changing? Because the art market is just a reflection of contemporary society. And contemporary society is doing nothing but change right now. If anybody says it's not changing, I'll take them down on that. There are a lot of people who would back me. But right now, even if you look at the things associated with the election in 2016, the art market is changing dramatically in response to all of these events.